What does one do with 20 skeins of beautiful, vibrant, chunky yarn? You make a giant, chunky finger knitted blanket, of course. 1 year ago, I started my Bellina Boutique Facebook page, and I had every intention of taking this big ball of yarn and doing a video making the biggest blanket in Facebook Live history ever. I knew it would be epic, so I procrastinated. Now here it is a year later, and I decided no more procrastinating. But instead of doing it live, I decided better to do a tutorial instead. So let's get started. First thing you do is you pull out a long strand of yarn that you're going to use later on to tie it off or weave into the end of your blanket. So you make sure it's a good long length in case you run short at the end of the project. Now next you're going to start with a slip knot. I show you how to do this twice here in case you blinked the first time. Once you make the first slip knot loop, you want to adjust that opening of the loop so your thumb and your index finger can fit inside of it and open and close. Just like this. Just so you're able to pull that working yarn through the loop. And now you're ready to make your chain. And your chain is pretty easy to do. You just keep pulling that working yarn through each loop all the way across. You just want to make sure that those loops are nice and big and not too tight, that your fingers can't fit through them. And you're going to repeat this process of pulling the yarn through the next loop and counting as you go. Make sure you're counting your stitches. Now when you get to the end of this row, and that's going to depend on how wide you want your blanket to be, then you're going to insert the working yarn through your last loop, and you're going to start going in the other direction. It's pretty simple, back and forth. Anyway, you're going to continue pulling the yarn through each loop to the other end. And make sure your loops are rather large. You lay them down flat on your table or your working surface so you don't lose any of your stitches along the way. And it's important that you look down the row and you can see the loops lying flat. Now every so often I like to take the time to count those stitches because you don't want to miscount or skip a stitch. Better to catch it early than end up having to pull out a ton of stitches later on, right? So, and you don't want your blanket crooked either. So before you know it, your blanket is growing row by row, and it's probably going to take you a little bit of time, so put on a couple of your favorite movies or binge watch a series or two, and before you know it, you'll be done. Now next I'm going to show you a couple of sped up segments from two different angles, just so that you can see how the size of the loops are and how it moves along. And notice how I pat down the loops so that they lie flat. That helps them not to get twisted while you're working. And I try to keep the size of the loops the same as the others. Its uniformity is great because that's going to ensure a nice looking product. And here I'm going to share a little tip along the way. I learned zigzagging your working yarn across the table seems to help the flow of everything. That way you're not tugging on that big ball of yarn and having to stop every once in a while to fix it. So, and another tip is when the blanket gets larger than your arms reach, you just fold it back and forth like you saw me do here, and you just lean across it nice and comfy so you can have a nice soft surface to work on as you go. Okay, now this is an important part to finish your blanket. I believe they call it casting off in knitting, but this is going to be the end of your blanket. the finishing of your last row. You start on the opposite end of the blanket that has that long tail that you started with. You take your last loop and you insert your working yarn, as I said, in the direction of your yarn tail that you started with. And you're going to go in that direction, taking the loop next to it, insert one loop inside of the other. And you're going to repeat this step, inserting first the working yarn into the loop and then inserting one loop inside the other, all the way across as you see me do here. This is going to give the end of your throw a really nice edge. Now you're going to continue all the way to the other end, as I said, toward the beginning tail that you started with. And once you reach the end, you're going to pull all of your remaining yarn through that loop a couple of times. And you're going to form a nice knot there, okay? Once you have your knot formed, you're going to take your working yarn just like you were sewing. My mom called it a whip stitch. You just take your working yarn up and through and under and over and under and over all of those stitches all along the side of your blanket, all the way to the end. Now here your tail meets your working yarn and you just knot them together. Now if your working yarn was too short, then you had the insurance of a nice long tail that you could weave up the side of the blanket to meet your working yarn, and that's why I suggest keeping a long tail in the beginning. See? There's a method to my madness. And here it is in all its glory. It's huge, it's warm, and it's about as vibrant as any blanket I've ever seen. Truly, this is such an easy project, you guys, and no one says you have to make it 20 skeins. You can go 12 to 15, that would suffice. I hope I've inspired you to make one of these luxurious beauties for yourself or to give as a gift to someone you love. They truly do make the best gifts. I've made a few, albeit not this big. If you've enjoyed this tutorial, please give it a thumbs up, like, subscribe, and follow my page on YouTube, Facebook, and Pinterest. Also, visit me in my Etsy boutique for a plethora of unique, one-of-a-kind items for your family, your home, and for gift giving.